Now the God of patience and consolation grant you to be like-minded, one toward another, according to Jesus Christ. It is now 8 o'clock. We welcome you to our 8 o'clock experience. Amen. 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 Good to be in the house of the Lord one more time. Amen. This is our Brotherhood Sunday, so I got some good-looking brothers up here to help us out with our devotion. We're going to have a scripture by Brother Hippolyte. We'll have a prayer by Deacon Carney, and then we'll have a song by none other than Brother Reed. Amen.
Would you please stand for your reading? Philippians 3rd chapter, verse 1 through 6. Finally, my brother, rejoice in the Lord. To write the same thing to you, to me, indeed, is not grievous, but for your, it is safe. Beware of dogs, beware of evil workers, beware of the concisions, for we are the circumcision which worship God in the Spirit, and rejoice in Christ Jesus, and have no confidence in the flesh, though I might also have confidence in the flesh. If any man thinketh that he has flesh, if any man thinketh he has, whereof he might trust in the flesh, I am more circumstances the 8th day of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, and Hebrews as touching the law, Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, touching righteousness which is in the law, blamelessly. I read you Philippians 3, 1 through 6. Go ahead.
You may be seated, please. You may be seated. Just bow our head for a word of prayer, if you would. Thank you. Father, we thank you for allowing us to be here on this morning. We thank you, Lord, for waking us up in our right mind, God. We thank you, Lord, for all that you've done, all that you're doing in our lives, Lord God, the changes that you're making subtle and those that are noticeable. Lord God, we ask that you would continue to bless us, bless our children as they prepare to go back to school, Lord God, that their minds will be stayed on you, Lord God. Thank you again for keeping us and loving on us, Lord God, and all the provisions that you have given to each and every one of us, Lord. We thank you for those churches open in your name. Lord God, we ask that you would bless the word today, Lord God, that comes forth, that we as people, Lord God, would do something with the word that you have given us. We thank you, we love you, we praise you. With you, we can do all things. Without you, we can do nothing. It's in your son, Jesus' name, we do pray. Amen.
Morning, to the Spirit. Morning. We don't have so many amens. We're going to keep saying amen. Amen. Normally, the brotherhood just come down here and stand up. But this morning, they're going to sing. They're going to sing. They're going to sing this morning. We're going to do a one-word song. That's all y'all have to do is one word. All you got to do is say amen. Amen. And I'm sure these guys will help you. Everybody got that? Amen. One-word song. Amen. Amen. We start off with amen. We're going to end up with amen. 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 Everybody say amen. Amen. Now that old preacher said I told you once, amen, and I told you twice, amen, can't get to heaven if you mistreat your wife. Amen. And that old preacher said I told you time, amen, and time again, amen, Can't get to heaven, hey, if you're living in sin, hey. Now that old preacher, hey, said Matthew 1, hey, and 21, hey. Angels told Mary, hey, she was having a son, hey. Now that old preacher, hey, said his name in Jesus, hey, Emmanuel, hey, King of kings, hey, Lord of lords, hey, Prince of peace, hey. But that old preacher, hey, he called him Savior, hey, my Savior, hey, your Savior, hey. Now everybody say, amen, good God Almighty, hey, oh Lord, hey, amen, amen, hey, let's do that again now. Everybody say, hey, woo, 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 hey, amen, hallelujah now, hey, amen, amen, amen,
Amen. Now change to the hands of our pulpit. Amen.
Amen. Give God some praise in the house. Has he been good to you? Did he wake you up this morning and start you on your way? That's the God we serve. Give God some praise. Amen. This morning, responsive readings come from Ephesians 4, verses 1 through 6. I'll be the leader, you'll be the congregation, and in the end we'll do all together. Amen. I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling which you were called.
With all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love.
Endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in bond of peace.
There is
One body, one spirit, even as ye are called in one hope of your calling.
One Lord, one faith, one baptism, all one God, one for all, who is above all, and through all,
and in the all.
Amen. Amen. Give God some praise once again. Amen.
Good morning, True Spirit. Good morning. This is the point at which we acknowledge our visitors. Do we have any visitors this morning? All right, we have no visitors, but we do have a saying here. God loves you, we love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. Amen.
Amen. Before we get to announcements, can I have John? Can you announce the anniversary, please?
Good morning, True Spirit. Whoa. All right, we've been hyping the silver anniversary up for the last 4 weeks, I believe, because that's been 4 weeks since the last brotherhood. So here I go again. We're on that last leg of the 25th anniversary of the church picnic and anniversary. The theme is standing together on this rock with the unified vision. Scripture, 2 Samuel 22nd, verses 2 and verse 3a. Okay. Starting Friday, we're going to have our musical. We lined up an awesome cast, so let's get out here like back in the day, Friday night. Like, what's the name? Johnny Kemp just got paid. We will get paid in the church on that Friday, all right? Saturday, we're going to have our picnic. We're going to have the chicken, brats, sausage. Somebody's saying collard greens, but I'm not cooking them, so Come out, bring the family, friends. Let's have a good time in the Lord. Sunday is pretty much the climax, the 8 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 3:30 service with Pastor Hendricks from King Baptist Church up in Denver, Colorado. Also, all ministries who have not had their pictures taken for their ministry, please stay after the 1 o'clock service so we can get your picture taken. We don't want anyone left out of the souvenir journal. Also, the shirts will be ready for delivery on September 8th. So, 25 years, I mean, we should get some claps or something about that. That's a long time to be in one building. So, let's all have a rip-roaring good time, and thank you for your time. September. Correction, August 8th. August 9th is picnic.
Good morning! Today is July 28th, and it is a wonderful day here at True Spirit. My name is JV, and let's get started on this week's announcements. So it cooled down just a little bit, but it's still really hot out there. And I know some of you may be going on vacation to escape the heat. Well, you don't have to miss on Sunday services. You can catch up on live or previous services and more by searching and subscribing to the channel TSBC Media on YouTube. Are you a new member to True Spirit? Well, we have a class just for you, and it occurs every Sunday in the fellowship hall, starting at 9:30 a.m. And for those of you who just want to dive deeper and learn more about God's Word, well, we also have our Sunday school class, and it's at the same time. Now, I'm going to be honest. If you don't know by now that it is our 25th church anniversary, then I have to say that you're slacking. But if you do know by now that it's our 25th church anniversary, then you should be giving all glory and honor to God for allowing us to have another year, especially our 25th year. This anniversary is starting on August 9th with our musical, and then on August 10th we'll have our annual church picnic. And I heard a little bit about what's going to be on the menu, and I'm telling you, if I were you, I would not miss it. Finally, on Sunday we will have our 8 a.m., 11 a.m., and 3:30 p.m. worship service. The theme for this year is standing together on this rock with a unified vision, coming from 2 Samuel chapter 22 verses 2 through 3. And the colors are gold, silver, and blue. Again, let's get excited because 25 years for any church is no small feat, and we are looking forward to 25 more. Now that does it for our upcoming events. Keep up with what's going on with us by searching and liking us on Facebook at True Spirit Baptist Church. Now here are the rest of your weekly announcements. And remember, God loves you, I love you, and there is nothing you can do about it, even if you try. Have a blessed week.
And it's already done. If you believe it, it's already done. Just trust Him, 'cause it's already done. Already done. Already done. Praying. If you believe it, you better thank Him, because it's already done. Already done. Praying and worrying. We gotta thank Him. You know you got it. The battle is over. Praying. Hey, yeah. Said the battle is over. Don't worry, just thank Him for the victory. You got pray. And don't worry, just thank Him for the victory. You got pray. And don't worry, just thank Him for the victory. You got pray. You got the authority. Just thank Him for the victory. Come on, pray.
Well, he's my rooftop in the rage of the storm. He's my protector, there'll never be no harm. He is the bread that sits on the table My God can do it. He's truly able, and I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
And I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
Hey, try my Jesus, try him out. He's worthy to be served. Well, he's my rooftop in the rage of the storm. He's my protector. There'll never be no harm. He is the bread that sits on my table. My God can do it. He's truly able, and I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
And I'm gonna serve
I'm
him.
gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
Hey, try my Jesus, try him out. He's worthy to be served.
Well, he's my mountaintop. When I was down in the valley, he's my road to Damascus. When I lived in an alley, he's a good, good shepherd, and he watches over me. He's my hope, he's my joy, he's my victory, and I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
Well, I'm gonna serve him.
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 gonna
Well,
serve
and try my Jesus, try him out.
He's worthy to be served.
Well, he's my mountaintop. When I was down in the valley, he's my road to Damascus. When I lived in an alley, he's the good, good shepherd, and he watches over me. He's my hope, he's my joy, he's my victory, and I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
Well, I'm gonna serve
I'm
him.
gonna serve him.
Well, I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
gonna serve
Well, and try my Jesus, try him out.
He's worthy to be served.
Well, now, come on, musicians. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm gonna serve him.
I'm gonna serve him.
Well, I'm gonna serve him.
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 gonna
Well, and try my Jesus, try him out.
He's worthy to be served.
Well, he's my rooftop from the rage, from the storm. He's my protector. There will never be no harm. He is the bread that sits on the table. My God can do it. He's surely able, and I'm gonna serve him.
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 I'm gonna
Well, and try my Jesus, try him out.
He's worthy to be served.
Morning, True Spirit.
Morning.
It is altar prayer. I'm going to ask that you come to the altar. Heavenly Father, we thank you this morning for another day that you have blessed us to see, God. Lord, we thank you, God, for the activity and use of all of our limbs, God. Not only our limbs, God, every organ that's working, God. Lord, we thank you, God, to how you have watched over us last night and you protected us from danger seen and unseen, God. Lord, we come and we recognize that you are God, creator of heaven and earth, God. Lord, the earth is yours and the fullness thereof, God. You hold all power in your hand, God. Lord, we pray in the name of Jesus this morning, God, that your will be done in our lives today, God, as it is in heaven, God. Lord, we thank you, Lord, that you forgive us of all of our sins, God, and continuously cleanse us from all unrighteousness, God. So, Lord, we say thank you this morning. Thank you for your goodness, God. Thank you for your mercy, God. Thank you for your love and kindness, God. Lord, thank you, Lord, that you never leave us nor forsake us, God. You are with us in the midst of every trial, every tribulation, God, every pain in our body, every sickness, God, every heartache, God. You are with us, God. Lord, open our eyes and help us to see your goodness, God, even in the midst of it, God. Help us to learn and understand, God, the trials that we experience, God, in the name of Jesus, Lord. And God, we give all the glory to you today, God. We pray, God, for this house today, God. We pray that your glory will fall today, God. We pray that your spirit would have full reign, God. Lord, we pray that the anointing will fall afresh on the speaker of the hour, God. Lord, we thank you on this morning, God. Thank you, Lord, that we are able to go into the house of worship, God. And Lord, we are able to open our mouth and praise you, God. Lord, I thank you that we have that privilege, God. We have that privilege to worship you, God. And so we say thank you this morning. Thank you, God, how you have taken care of our families, God. Those that are not with us, God. How you cared for them, God. Lord, even though we was not with them, you are there with them, God. Even those children are going off to college, God. Lord, we ask that you comfort the hearts of the parents, God. Lord, knowing that you are with their kids, God. And Lord, the lessons that they taught their children, God, Lord, they will bring into action, God, in the name of Jesus, Lord. Pray for those who have come to the altar today. You know their heart's desires. You know their needs, God. You know their struggles, God. You know their strengths and weaknesses, God. And so, Lord, we pray, God, Lord, that you would meet every need, God. Lord, comfort every heart, God. Lord, renew every mind, God. Lord, turn around every situation, God. Rebuke the devourer that's in their life, God, that's wreaking havoc, God. Lord, you said in your word that when the devil raises up a standard, when the devil comes in like a flood, you would raise up a standard, God. Lord, you say that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church, God. And so, Lord, we pray, God, Lord, that that we thank you, Lord, that you are in the midst, God, and you are working in the spirit on our behalf, God. Lord, you are fighting every battle on our behalf, God. Lord, I pray, God, that our ears and our eyes will be tuned to you, God. We will look to you, the author and the finisher of our faith, God. And so, Lord, I thank you, God. I thank you, Lord, that we come against and we bind every distraction today, God. Everything that will hinder, God, the people of God from hearing what the Spirit of God is saying, God. Everything that will keep them bound up and prevent them from moving forward in the things that you have called them to do, God. Lord, we bind everything that will turn them around, God. Every friendship, every relationship, God. Everything that will turn them around in a direction, God, that you do not want them to go. I pray, God, in the name of Jesus, that everyone in here will walk in the calling that you have called them to, God. They will fulfill the purpose you have planned for them, God. Lord, they will walk in the steps you have ordered for them, God, in the name of Jesus, Lord. And I pray, God, for unity, love, and peace, God, and, Lord, togetherness, God. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Good morning, church. Good morning. It's offering time here, True Spirits. Ushers, if you will come forward, please. Lord, we lift this offering up to you that it be used for the building of your kingdom. In the name of Jesus, and let the church say amen.
Hallelujah now. Hope I can finish this one. Hey, y'all. I feel like going on. I feel like going on. Listen, listen. Though trials come on every hand, I feel like going on. Listen, I feel like going on. I feel like going on. Through heartache and pain, through sunshine or rain, I feel like going on, going on, going on, going on, going on. Though trial come on every hand, I feel like going on. Let me tell you about the trials again. I feel like going on. I feel like going on. Listen, listen. Though trial come, that means sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. Yeah, I feel like going on, going on, going on, going on, going on. Though trials come, oh Lord, on every hand, I feel like going on.
on, let's give the men another hand. Let's give the brotherhood another hand. Certainly, we thank God for who he is and what he is. And we're grateful that he has allowed us to be in the house one more time. I don't know about you, but today is a good day. And it's good because he allowed me to see it. Whatever your good is, that should keep you in a celebratory moment or praise. Because once more again, he has blessed you to be living and to be alive. Is there anybody here that can at least say, thank you, Jesus? That can at least put your hands together and give him a celebratory praise for how good he's been. He's awesome. And an awesome God deserves an awesome praise. Amen. Amen. With your manuals of life, if you would turn with me to Psalms 34. Psalms 34. Psalms 34. If we jump to verse 3, if you're there, say amen. If you're still looking, shout out Bible study. We got room for you. We don't discriminate. Amen. And it reads, "O magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together." That is the end of the reading. Our God and Father's preaching time. Songs have been sung, gifts have been given. And Father, we just say thank you before you allowed us to let us see another day. Lord, we give you glory and honor because you didn't have to do it, but yet you did. So now, God, we ask that you would be again a giving God that will share some crumbs from the Master's table. That as we are few of your servants here, wanting to eat to want no more, that you would feed us. Let me decrease, you increase in me. Hide me behind the throne. Let them see your image upon me and hear your voice through me. So let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight. Oh Lord, I praise you, give you all glory and adoration because you're my strength. And Lord, I love you because you're my Redeemer. And the household of faith said, amen. You may be seated. If you would help me on this morning to talk to you on the subject, my worship is big. My worship is big. As we look at this very common and most useful book of Psalms, we always think of some things that David has been through. Psalms is broken up in 5 classifications. This particular classification being one of a hymn and also one of a poem, where one would give thanks to someone for what he has done and for what he is doing. Often you see many of the times that you read Psalms where David gives honor and adoration to God as being his God. But if you really look through Psalms, you'll see some stories that can remind us of where we came from and what we've been through. If you really dissect Psalms, you'll look at Psalms and you'll see that Psalms not only is a book that can show you the importance of having a relationship with God, but it will show you that God is always made his presence known in every situation. We know David. David hasn't always been a man of God. Such as you and I, we haven't always been men and women of God. David is one that we always reflect to give some type of similarities of our journey or our walk as believers. But no one wants to totally pay attention to David's before life. And that's when David was stuck on himself and yet acting foolish before the people of God. No one wants to totally give recognition or recognize when we have made a spectacle of ourselves, but yet God has showed himself superior and supreme and sovereign. No one really wants to identify with all the wrong that they have done, but yet will point out the wrong of others, but yet will not praise God because he still blessed us even in the midst of our wrong. I'm talking to somebody today. And so here we are in this psalm, in this hymn of Psalm, where David is saying we should now come together and we should now have a praise that as we come together as Christians, we can identify God for who he is. I mean, this morning, wasn't he the one that woke you up? He was the one that gave you food and put clothes on your back. In fact, he was the one that gave you the activities of our limbs. In fact, the Bible says it's in him that we move and have our beings. And the Bible also says the earth is the Lord's and they that dwell within. And so David is saying now is the time that as Christians, we should at least have a praise on our lips, some thanksgiving in our heart, that we can come together and magnify a God that has always been omnipresent. I'm preaching and you ain't saying nothing. Has always been omnipresent in your life, giving you the things that you need, the things that you really don't deserve, but yet he's covered you with bountiful blessings. And so now my worship becomes big because even in the process of all that I've done, he still decided to be a big God and bless me in a great abundance. So when we look at this text, and we see David as he talks to us in this text of 34, he gives us some pre-prompting of how we should prompt big worship. Worship in the Greek is proskuneo, meaning that we should kneel before God. So simply, as we look at the text and we begin to look, he's telling us you should have a prayer life. Because in order to begin worship, you must have a significant time that you've set aside to pray with God. You cannot worship or praise somebody that you don't know. And we do know that in prayer, we find out what our relationship is really about. I mean, I don't know about you, but oftentimes I have to go back to the Father just to show him and tell him how appreciative I am of the relationship that we have established and we have grown to have, and the ever forever giving love that we share. I mean, I wish I had some prayer warriors that could say, there are times that I have to just tell the Lord, Lord, I love you. Lord, I give honor to you. Lord, I just adore you for who you are in my life. And sometimes you have to stay on your knees in prayer until you get an answer that really you don't want to hear. But even though while on your knees, he will comfort you even though it's uneasy for you to receive his message. We have to have a prayer life in order to become effective. And in the prayer life, watch this, it becomes a devotion that you'll find yourself excited about doing. And I found it a thing here that people of God nowadays are not excited about praying because it exposes their relationship. And some people don't really have a relationship. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord the soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray. That's a childhood prayer. And the Bible says when I was a child, I spake as a child. But now I've got older, I put away childish. Now you need to say, Lord, I'm coming bold before you, at the throne of grace, with all the sins I've done from childhood even up until adulthood, and even when I get up in my old tender ages. But prayer has become an infection in the church because no one wants to pray. Everyone wants to watch instead of pray. And so David is saying you have to develop a prayer life which becomes a devotion. It becomes excitement for you because now you're loyal in what he has done and you're being loyal to your relationship. And watch this. Part of the problem in the churches today, that reason why worship is not effective, is because we don't pray enough. Well, prayer opens up the door to the relationship, but prayer also identifies your God. And I know some of you looking at me strange say, well, Reverend, I pray on a daily basis. But what is your prayer really? Is your prayer really something that you pray for asking of all that you want? Or is your prayer sometimes just simply saying, Lord, here I am, use me whatever way you need me to be used? I know I'm not going to get too many amens. Nobody likes to be used without getting a refund. And then what we've discovered as Christians, we always want to reap something for the service. But when was the last time you just said, Lord, I don't want nothing but just here I am, use me. Can I do anything for you today? Can I be of service unto you? And how many know when you work in the battlefield for the Lord, serving the Lord, it will pay off after a while. And so as I'm somewhat stuck there with the prayer, because today we're living in a time where you have to have prayer. We're having identity crisis in the church. You got people believing in this Bible, you got people believing in that Bible, and yet and still it still pertains to the same God. So then now our prayer is that now, Lord, that we will not become ignorant to your scripture, but we will become as one in your glory. Do y'all hear what I'm saying? Some people have gotten within themselves that because they don't have a prayer life, they blame everyone else that know how to pray. And so then now when prayer becomes effective in one's life, now you can see blessings upon him or her. And so now that goes to the case of where people begin to shower down on your blessings, what we call hatred. They get upset because you are blessed, but they don't understand that while in prayer, the Lord lets you know everything will be all right. So that's a blessing in itself. But if I shout because he's been good to me, don't hate because I serve a God that's a blessing God. In fact, celebrate with me because if he blessed me and you believe in the God, I don't care if you read the Holy Quran. I don't care if you read some made up Bible, King James Version, some new study. It's still the same God that will bless you. Okay, somebody say my worship is big. Yeah, it's big. So David, he says, you got to have a prayer life. And so then when you look at verse 1, he says, when you have a prayer life, then you can establish a premeditated behavior. It's right there in the text. You can have a premeditated behavior because then now you had your mind, or you have your mind made up that you're going to give God your all and your all. Not only that, you will kneel before people in the presence of God because of who he is. And watch this. Some of us have to put it in our hearts that it's okay to have a premeditated praise. The reason being is because there are some premeditated people that will come to try to stop your praise. But if you had devotion before you came to church and you had a prayer life while you were in devotion, you will come out with some praise. So then now when I enter into the church, nothing can distract me. Nothing can become a stumbling block because I got Jesus on my mind. Why come to church to be a troublemaker? Why come to church to be a stumbling block? When he says when the saints of God get together, what a time, what a time. But when he says let everything that has breath praise you, that means we got to stop thinking of ourselves and praise God together. A premeditated behavior. And you do know we got some baby kids. The behavior of some of the saints are rowdy and rough and rugged. So then, therefore, you should be really premeditated, because everyone don't come to church for the same reasons. We argue and we make notion of, I want to know my purpose. Purpose is not a talent. Purpose is not a gift. Purpose is worship. And you've been given the purpose to worship and serve God all the days of your life. And the problem is our behavior has become so problematic that we become junior Jesuses in the church. Where when we come to church, we want to be worshiped. We want to say what God said and not really testify the truth of what he said. And God is saying, you got to have a premeditated praise. Because there are some people that's coming in the church to set you up. Did y'all hear me? But how many know the Bible says if you be ashamed to own me before my people, I'll be ashamed to own you before my Father. He said, but if I be lifted up, I'll draw all. That's a premeditated praise, because despite of everything that's going on in my life, God, you still get the glory. Sickness, you get the glory. High blood pressure, God, you still get the praise. Diabetes, you still, cancer, you still, financial, you still get the praise, because there's no greater God than you. So we got to have a premeditated behavior, which will not, watch this, allow us to react to people. Because somebody say premeditated. But also right there in verse 1, he says that the level of your propensity is normal. The level of your propensity is normal. Why is it normal, Reverend? I'm glad you're asking me. Because it's who I am. Some people will pick and choose when they want to be Christians. Some people will pick and choose when they want to be praisers. But everyone wants to be on the same page of receiving blessing. The propensity of my praise is normal. Why? Because I want God to know that I'll praise him even though I don't see it coming. I'll praise him even though I don't see the blessing come. And you do know there are some people that don't understand that you have to be who you are even outside the church. Y'all hear me? It says, I will bless him at all times. That means even when that boss is getting on your nerves. Sometimes you got to look at him and say, I thank God for you. I thank God for you, because it's because of you I'm strong. It's because of you I got more integrity. Because you do know there's some atheists that say they're saints and they live in the house of God and they work on the outside. I wish I had some people that can testify and say, Reverend, sometimes I just have to lift up my hands in business meetings and say, Lord, I thank you for all the changes. I thank you for all the new addendums, because God, despite of it all, you still gonna carry. Y'all ain't shouting with me this morning. You still gonna carry me through, because I know if you did it for me before, you'll do it for me again. Yeah, you have to be normal. David says, I'll bless him at all times. And watch this, he said, his praises shall continually. That means, watch this, that means it has to be repetitious. You can't just thank him on payday Friday or hallelujah Wednesday. You got to praise him on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and shout on Sunday and Saturday. Why? Because you've been just that good. And because you've been that good, I can magnify you because you've been great and awesome. How many know we serve an awesome God? Look at your neighbor and say, stay consistent in your praise. You have to stay consistent in your praise. Your propensity is normal. People should not have to wonder if you are really a saint of God. And then, this is fresh. This is a good one right here. This is fresh. I know it's good because he just gave it to me. Some of us have been sitting in the darkness so long that darkness is all that you know. So now watch this. God is encamping angels around you, wondering if you're still going to acknowledge him in darkness. But because you're not used to the light, your prayer life ain't no stronger than a 10-pound weight. Now when he shows you something different, he opens your eyes to newness. All you can do is complain. Think about it. David had to go through months, years, time and time of trials before he opened his eyes to really see that God was speaking to him. What is God saying to you? He's always been normal and consistent in what he says. And we need to get it in our mind that we serve a consistent God. And he's looking for consistent praisers. The Bible says he rewards those who diligently seek. That means you got to do it with some pride. You got to do it with some enthusiasm. Sometimes you don't see it, but yet you got to believe it's on its way. And sometimes you got to celebrate him even in your weakest moments. I wish I had about 2, and I'll make 3 that can say, Reverend, I've been busted and disgusted, but yet I still got to shout. I still got to praise that I can tell the Lord, thank you for what you've done. I lift you up for keeping me strong. I wish I had 5, and I'll make 6 that can say, Reverend, I'm so glad that trouble don't last always. Yeah, the propensity must remain normal. But then watch this. Your level of praise and worship should penetrate the ears of the listener. Look at verse 2. It says it right there in the text. It says clearly, my soul shall make her boast in the Lord. The humble shall hear thereof and be glad. Watch this. It's amazing how people will close their ear to your shout. Let me get it. They will close their ear to your shout because they don't understand your shout. Now, if you really look at this text and you understand David, I ain't even in the verse that we came up with. I'm going to stay right here for a little while. David had to act insane. In Samuel, he had to act insane around people that think they had it all together. But while acting insane, his behavior penetrated the hearts and the minds of those that surrounded him. 2 Samuel, I believe it was 20. You read it when you get a chance. It's when he had to act foolish and insane because they thought something was wrong with him. Because of what he was believing and how he was living and what he stood upon. And the principalities of life can close your ears to other people's shout. Because the Bible says we're not fighting against people, but we're fighting against the spiritual warfare. Those are the principalities. Watch this. Everyone in there has a sign of Satan in you. I know y'all don't like to hear that. Because, watch this, everyone in here can be evil. Look at somebody and say, not me. Look at somebody and say, not me. And then, truth be told, some of y'all looking at me now with evil spirits. And here it is. David says, your level of praise and worship must penetrate the ears of the listener, because guess what? They need to be changed. So then if they can see some realness in your shout, in your worship, then now they see that if I used to hang with him and God changed him, what makes me think God won't change? I wish I had some transformed folk that can just say, Reverend, that was once me. I didn't think the Lord could change a rascal like me. I didn't think he could change a wretch undone. But I wish I could get a shout that could say it was his amazing grace. How sweet it sounds. That saved a wretch. Y'all ain't with me this morning. Some of y'all still wretched in your spirit. But you got to understand, it's good to understand and know when you were messed up. That's why David said, created me a clean heart and renew the right spirit. And the Bible says God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit. And I wish I had some redeemed saints that could just stand to your feet and say, I'm so glad that God redeemed me when he did. That's why my praise is big, because he looked beyond my faults and saw all of my needs. He saw the best of me when everybody else saw the worst in me. He did it all for me. He died on the cross for me. So now I know I never would have made it without you in my life. Now because you're in my life, you're big because I'm stronger. I'm wiser. Look at somebody and say, I'm better. Yeah, I'm better. So quickly, he says, your level of worship should penetrate the ears of the listener. Because the saints used to say when I was coming up that if God has truly done anything in your life, when the Spirit is upon you, it can get off on somebody else. And it should penetrate the ears of the listener. Why? Because we got some nosy people in church. I wake up now. We have some nosy people in church. Y'all know I'm right about it. And the issue has become, Brother Woods, is that they want to look in on your glory and all of your mishaps, but don't want nobody to know about their mishaps. So that's why when we come to the altar, everybody got their eyes open. They still looking at somebody else while they pray, hoping to hear confession. But you ain't confessed because you don't want nobody to know you've been messy. But how many know when the Bible says if you confess of your sins daily, then he's faithful and just to reward us. Sometimes you got to let them be nosy. Tell them all about your story, because can't nobody tell it better than you. And sometimes you got to let the gossipers know. If you want to gossip, I'm going to give you something good to gossip about. They said I wasn't going to make it. That's truthful. They said I used to be a drug dealer, an alcoholic, a whoredom, a prostitute, whatever it was. That's some truth. How is it truthful? Because I'm a living testimony that God changed my life. Yeah, sometimes you got to, your praise got to penetrate the ear of the listener, because now as I listen in on your story, now I can appreciate your shout. Guess somebody say, I appreciate you. I can appreciate your shout, because now, watch this, now that you're shouting, and after all you've been through, and all that I'm going through, I believe the Bible says where there's 2 or 3 gathered together in my name, touching and agreeing, there am I in the midst. I wish I had somebody that can witness with me and say, Reverend, I'm glad when they try to look in my life. because now I'm going to shout and let them know why I'm shouting, because now I can grab another sinner's hand and tell them, baby, if you just hold on, trouble don't last always. If you just hold on, payday is coming after a while. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy is coming in the morning. Penetrate the ear of the listener. Had David not developed his relationship, then David could never magnify God. Had David never been through what he'd been through, he could never say, let us praise him together. Let us lift him up together. He was talking in the sense to tell us that if we all have been delivered, we come to church with the same purpose. And can I just go back to Bible study? That means we have spiritual unity. We come together in one voice to lift God up and magnify who he is in all of our lives. That's why in the 150 Psalms it says, let everything that has breath praise ye the Lord. My time is up. But David gave us that benediction in Psalms 150, because he says, if in Psalms 34 you can't exalt him with me and you can't magnify him with me, at least you can give him praise. Why? Because you're still alive. Did you hear what I'm saying this morning? The reason why my worship is big, because the Lord kept me here on another day's journey. And I don't know about you, but I'm glad about it. Ain't the Lord all right? And is there anybody here that can tell me, Reverend, my worship is big because the Lord has blessed me one more time to be in the land of the living? Ain't the Lord all right? Is there anybody here that can testify the reason why your worship is big is because if you look back over your life and think about the things that the Lord has brought you from, your soul shouts out hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus. And we know what hallelujah is. It is the highest praise. Hallelujah means give God the highest praise. And is there anybody here that can testify why your worship is big? Because when you woke up this morning, you were clothed in your right mind. Ain't the Lord all right? But is there anybody here that can just remember when you was down and out? Did the Lord come and see about you? That's why my worship is big. Can I get somebody to stand with me and say, Reverend, the reason why my worship is big, because God has been so good. He's been so good to me. When I think of the goodness of Jesus and all he's done, my soul shall make a boast and shout out, thank you, Jesus. Hallelujah. I give you the highest praise. Why? Because you keep on blessing me time and time again. Faithful is our God. Yes, he is. Faithful and just to reward us. Can I get somebody to just slip your hands up and say, I'm so glad that the Lord, he blessed me, and he blessed me real good. do I know? One Friday, he went on the cross called Calvary. He hung there. You know he died. Didn't he die? All day Friday, all night Friday, they put him in the borrowed tomb. All day Saturday, all night Saturday. But how many know he got up with power in his hand, power to walk right, power to talk right. Reason why my worship is big, he did it all just for me and for you. Can you look at your neighbor and tell your neighbor, my worship is big because he blessed me up on the cross and he keeps on blessing me even though he came down from the cross. Is there anybody that got a celebratory praise that can give God 2 seconds of your praise and celebrate him for who he is in your life? Just shout out, yeah, yeah. My worship is big. Come on, let's celebrate Jesus.